Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I'm going to talk a little bit about soft pastels. Now, I know it's a medium that a lot of people are not interested in. It's not as popular as oil paints, acrylics or watercolors. In fact, I know just by putting the word soft pastel in the title of this video, I can guarantee that it will get less than half of the views that a watercolor video would get. I recently watched a video, I can't remember, it was a curator in a large museum, and it was either in London or New York, I can't remember which one. But anyway, they were talking about their collection of Western art, and they had paintings by many different artists. They had thousands of oil paintings, but less than 20 paintings in soft pastel. It's not a medium that has ever really been as popular as, say, oil paint or watercolor or even acrylic more recently. But there are artists who have used soft pastels. Some of them used it quite regularly, some from time to time. On screen you can see a couple of examples. On the left, this is a portrait of Vincent van Gogh, and this was done by Toulouse-Lautrec. They spent a bit of time together, along with some other artists, Bonnard and a whole bunch of others, in Paris, in the early days of Vincent van Gogh's art career. They all sort of went off in their own directions pretty much, but at the time they did spend some time together. And this was a little portrait that Toulouse-Lautrec did of Vincent van Gogh. Some of the Impressionist artists, Degas in particular, used soft pastel quite a lot. Another artist who was around about the same time but wasn't associated with any of these other Impressionist or Post-Impressionist movements was Redon, and he did quite a few floral still lifes. You can see an example on the right on the screen, and again using soft pastels. So it's not a popular medium. It never has really been. But it is kind of a special medium. It has its own unique characteristics. And if you love the medium, you understand. It is quite a special medium. I have a very love-hate relationship with the medium, which we'll go into. This video I'm going to tell you a little bit about soft pastels, not a huge amount, just scratching the surface, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey with soft pastels and what I'm trying to do these days. These are just briefly a couple of older paintings I did using soft pastels, two landscapes. These are from 2 or 3 years ago, just for reference, because the way I use the soft pastels these days is quite different. So the soft pastels that I use are mostly Schminke, produced by the German company Schminke. I have a few by the French company Sennelier. They're quite similar, not exactly the same, but very similar sort of quality and price. But I do prefer, my favorite is the Schminke pastels. They're not too expensive, but they are good quality. Soft pastels. So one of the disadvantages with soft pastels are they can get very expensive very quickly. See, with a liquid paint, oil paint, acrylic, watercolor, whatever it is, you can mix the paint. You don't have to go out and buy every single color of paint. You can start with some primaries and mix whatever color you want to some extent. You can't do that with the dry medium of soft pastel. You just can't do it. You have to go out, if you want a specific green, you have to go out and buy a stick of that green, assuming that any manufacturer actually makes that color. So two disadvantages there. One, you're sort of dependent on the manufacturers creating exact color that you want. And the second problem is you have to go out and actually buy individual sticks of pastel just to get that color. There are ways around this. You can be a bit more flexible in your choice of colors and so on, but it is a potential disadvantage of the soft pastels. To give you some idea of price and how expensive they can become, I can say on the left are some Sminke pastels, the ones I use. On the right are soft pastels made by a company called La Maison de Pastel in France, in Paris. And they've been making soft pastels for a few hundred years, I think. Their pastels are probably the highest quality soft pastels that you can buy, and the price tag, the price on them sort of reflects that quality. So this little box of 12 colored pastels, and obviously you can buy different assortments, different colors. So 12 pastel sticks will cost you 215 euros. In US dollars, that's about 223 US dollars, or close to 200 UK pounds. So it's not cheap. It's quite expensive. But they are very high quality. If you're interested in soft pastels, you're interested in how they're manufactured, and you're interested in a little bit of the history of the company La Maison de Pastel, I've put a link to a YouTube video in the description box below this video. If you have any interest in soft pastels, I would definitely recommend watching that video. It's very interesting. And they do show you the process of manufacturing these soft pastels. If you go onto Google, you'll see a lot of questions that people sometimes ask about this medium. Now, as with all things on the internet, these questions range from very sensible, good questions through to, let's say, less sensible questions. So some of these questions, we'll start off with one of the less sensible ones, maybe. Some people ask, are soft pastels just colored chalk? And the simple answer to that is no, they're not. They're two quite different things. Chalk is chalk. Soft pastels are quite different. Soft pastels don't contain any chalk. At least the good quality ones don't. They're just a mixture of pigments, water, and a very, very small amount of binder, a water-soluble binder. They mix it up into something that is similar to, if you're making a cake, the sort of batter that you might use to get started. They start like that. You can mix, well, it's very liquid like that. You can mix in different pigments to create different colors. You then have to let it dry for a while, and then you have to squeeze the water out, and you're left with something that resembles more like cookie dough. And that's what you can then mold into the sticks, chop them up, label them, and so on. But they're not chalk. They're just little sticks of almost pure pigment. And that's what allows you to, when you use them on a piece of paper, you do get this saturated, intense line of color, at least with the high quality soft pastels. Lower quality pastels are usually not as soft. They have clay and things mixed in with them. It's not just pigment and binder. It's pigment plus binder plus other stuff. And the other stuff makes it cheaper, but it also makes it lower quality. So some of the hard pastels are really quite, it's a different medium, really. Another question, a more sensible question perhaps, is people ask, do you need special paper to work with soft pastels? Paper, there are several different types of paper that you can use with soft pastels. So those couple of paintings that I showed before, I did those on a special pastel paper, a sanded pastel paper. It looks and feels like sandpaper, but it's an artist quality sandpaper. It's a lot more expensive than just basic sandpaper. The sandy surface is very porous and quite rough, and it grabs onto a lot of the pastel dust and holds it there. So you can build up very rendered paintings using this type of paper. Another type of paper uses an acrylic-based primer. There are a couple of companies that I know of that produce this primer. One is, I think it's an Australian company called Art Spectrum. And so you get this, it's just acrylic, like acrylic paint really. And you can get it in clear form or white, or like any acrylic, you can mix colors. You paint it onto the paper, you let it dry, and when it's dry, it has a very porous surface again, which again, like the sanded paper, allows, it hangs on to the pastel dust. I think the acrylic company Golden also produce a kind of primer for pastel paintings. Another type of pastel paper, the third type, is it's not coated. It doesn't have any sort of coating on the surface, but it is a very soft, fibrous surface. And again, it's those soft fibers that sort of cling on to the pastel dust. I don't use any of those papers anymore. I just use a basic sketching paper these days, which works for me, but it's not designed specifically for pastels, so it does put limitations on what I can do. These are two examples, more recent examples from last year of using this sketch paper. It's a toned paper. I say, for me, what I'm trying to do, it works. The reason I switched, well, there's two reasons. One, I wanted to make more sort of expressive marks, and I find it easier to do that on the sketching paper than on the specifically pastel paper. The pastel paper sort of clings on to the pastel as you're moving across the surface, I feel, and my feeling was I couldn't make the same sort of expressive marks that I could with this just basic sketch paper. On the downside, you can't build up layers. You can't just put a color on top of another color easily because you don't have that porous surface. And the grain of the paper fills up pretty quickly. Another thing I should say at this point, soft pastels are opaque. They're very opaque. So if you put a color down and then another color on top of it, basically all you'll see is the top color. So it's quite different, quite the opposite really of using watercolor, for example. The style that I'm trying to achieve with the soft pastels is influenced by this artist, Joan Erdley, and her landscapes. She did use soft pastels for some of her art, but most of her landscapes were done in oil paint. I'm not trying to copy her style, but I am influenced by it, and I'm trying to get some of that looseness and some of that expressive mark making, trying to incorporate that into the landscapes that I'm doing these days. So on screen you can see a couple of more recent examples. These are from maybe a couple of weeks ago. It is looser. There's a lot more scribbles and marks and expressiveness in it. I'm not trying to cover the whole paper with pastel dust. That's another one of these sort of slightly ridiculous questions on the internet. People will often ask is, do real artists use soft pastel? That's one of the questions. Another one is, can you call a pastel painting a painting? those sort of questions I don't care about. They're just ridiculous. They're not even worth thinking about. All I care about is the art and the artist who makes that art. You're taking a stick of pigment, some paper, and you're making marks. You're creating art. You're transforming those raw materials of the little pastel stick and the paper. You're transforming those into a piece of art. And that's what interests me. What you want, what labels you want to put on it. Is it a drawing? Is it a painting? Is it art? Whatever. I don't care. It's just not important to me. It's just the art itself. That's what I care about. And the artist who's making that art. So, as I said, there can be downsides to soft pastel. It can become very expensive. The good things for me are, in a way, the simplicity of the medium. So it is just almost pure pigment, a stick of pure pigment. There are no brushes, no solvents. It's just the pigment, the paper, and you. And using that simple equation, you can generate art. And it's that simplicity that appeals to me. And also the ability to make these expressive marks. I find that interesting and appealing. So there are problems with the medium, but there are also good points. And it's the good points that I'm focusing on. And that's, the things that I'm trying to experiment with. And moving slowly towards a style of using these soft pastels that I feel more comfortable with. And it is this looser, more expressive way of using them. It also has the advantage of using just sketching paper. It's much cheaper than the specialist papers. The pastels are still expensive, but at least if I can reduce the cost of the paper, that's something. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully see you again in next week's video.